The image most people have of a Viking settlement is mud, smoke, rough timber, people who solved problems with muscle and fire, not with thought. No system, no engineering, nothing worth borrowing. That image is accurate about the mud. Everything else is wrong. A Norse settlement at Hedeby, excavated by archaeologist Herbert Jankun between 1930 and 1939, and documented in his 1956 publication Haitabu and Handelsplatz der Wikingerzeit, archived at the Archäologisches Landesmuseum Schleswig in northern Germany, was building structures that held interior temperatures a full 30 to 40 degrees below the outdoor summer air. No machinery, no ice, no electricity. The earth did it. The same physical principle that a modern ground source contractor now charges $15,000 to install, with copper pipe instead of clay, and a thermostat bolted on to justify the invoice, Norse builders understood in the year 850. They built it in a day with a shovel, and the physics they used has not changed by a single variable since. There is one decision those Norse builders made, one structural choice, that separated a home that stayed livable through August from one that baked. It was not the timber they cut, not the stones they stacked, not the thickness of the turf on the roof. It was a decision about where the air entered the building and what it touched on the way inside. That answer is 30 seconds away. Viking crews did not get to test their solutions in comfortable conditions. Every technique they used was stress-tested by open ocean, frozen ground, and sub-zero temperatures simultaneously, for months at a time. If it failed, the crew died, not struggled, died. The techniques that survived that test are physically present today in the turf longhouses at Lance aux Meadows in Newfoundland, documented by archaeologist Brigitte Wallace in her 2006 Parks Canada publication, Westward Vikings. The saga of Lance aux Meadows, confirming continuous Norse habitation at the site from approximately 1000 CE. Those structures did not survive 1,000 years because someone preserved them. They survived because the physics does not expire. The reason you are paying $400 a year to cool your home is not because the modern system works better. It is because a buried clay pipe cannot be invoiced. But here is the part the cooling industry hoped you would never ask. Exactly how the Norse earth cooling principle worked at the level of moving air, and what you can build today for the cost of an afternoon. That is what comes next. This is not a new idea. Archaeologist Neil Price, writing in The Viking Way, published by Cambridge University Press in 2019, documents Norse longhouse construction as consistently using earth berming across settlements from Greenland to the British Isles. Earth berming means packing soil and turf tightly against the lower walls and sometimes the roof, placing the inhabited space in direct thermal contact with the stable ground below. Els Rosedal, in The Vikings, published by Penguin in 1987, notes that excavated Norse longhouses at Stung in Iceland, preserved under volcanic ash from the 1104 CE eruption of Mount Hekla, and excavated beginning in 1939, documented in the collections of the National Museum of Iceland in Reykjavik, show floor levels consistently sunk 1 to 2 feet below the surrounding ground surface. That structural choice was not accidental. It was deliberate placement of living space inside the Earth's thermal layer. The ground does something remarkable at a depth of 4 to 5 feet. It stops responding to the day's weather entirely. On a day when the surface air reaches 95 degrees, the Earth 4 feet down holds 50 to 55 degrees in most of the continental United States, confirmed in soil temperature data published by the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, which tracks ground temperature at depth across thousands of monitoring stations nationwide. The ground is not cool because anything is cooling it. It is cool because heat from the sun cannot push that deep before the season reverses. The ground at that depth is responding to the temperature of 6 months ago. In summer, it is still holding winter's cold. Think of it like a very thick stone wall inside a building. The outside face heats up in the afternoon sun. But if the wall is thick enough, the inside face never gets the message. The earth below does the same thing, but in every direction at once, and it never runs out of thickness. Norse builders at Hedeby in the 9th and 10th centuries, documented in Jankun's excavation site plans, constructed their sunken floor structures so that incoming air had to travel past or through earth contact surfaces before reaching the inhabited space. The air entered the Earth's temperature zone first. It arrived cool. In winter, a fire brought it back to warmth. In summer, with no fire, the incoming air alone kept the interior livable through the hottest weeks of the northern European year. The Earth was the machine. There was no machine. In 1902, Willis Carrier filed his first patent for mechanical air conditioning. Within 2 decades, the mechanical cooling industry had framed every passive cooling method as a primitive predecessor. Not wrong, they said, simply outdated. The infrastructure networks that followed, ductwork, compressors, refrigerant lines, licensed contractors, annual service appointments, made it commercially necessary to route every household through a metered build system. The knowledge that Norse, Roman, and Persian builders had maintained for centuries, passed through construction practice and preserved in the material record of sites like Hedeby and Stung, became worth less than a service call you schedule each April. You cannot sell a subscription to buried soil. You can sell one to a compressor unit that wears out on a 7-year cycle. That is the complete explanation. Nothing was banned, nothing was hidden. The billing cycle simply did not have room for free. At its height, the Norse trading network connected Newfoundland to Constantinople to Baghdad, documented by Ibn Fadlan in his eyewitness account of the Rus Vikings written in 921 CE, preserved in manuscript at the Meshed Shrine Library in Iran, and translated by historian Richard Fry in his 2005 publication Ibn Fadlan's Journey to Russia, released by Marcus Wiener Publishers. Every settlement operating across that network built structures that stayed cool in summer without paying anyone, without a bill, without a licensed contractor, without a service contract renewed each spring. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration's 2020 Residential Energy Consumption Survey, the average American household now spends over $400 a year on cooling alone. Norse builders spent nothing. The physics they used has not changed by a single variable since 900 CE. It is underneath your backyard right now, and almost nobody is using it. If that number stopped you, this channel exists for exactly that reason. Every week, we recover one more technique the industry assumed you would never find. Subscribe and hit the bell so you do not miss the next one. You have seen this principle your whole life. You have walked into a basement on a hot July afternoon and felt the air change the moment you reached the bottom stair. That drop is not from insulation, it is from direct earth contact. The basement walls sit against soil that is still carrying February's cold. You have noticed that a root cellar keeps vegetables fresh through August without any power running to it. Same principle, same physics, different container. The earth below 4 feet does not care what the weather is doing today. It is responding to the weather of 6 months ago. Move air past that surface and the air picks up that temperature before it goes anywhere else. Deliver that air into a building before it warms up and the building stays cool all day. That is the entire mechanism. There's nothing else to understand. Most people who try to replicate what Norse builders did make one mistake immediately. It is the first decision they make, and it is the only decision that determines whether what they build keeps a room at 65 degrees through August or does nothing useful at all. Here is what you need before we get to that mistake. One length of 4-inch PVC drain pipe. You need roughly 20 feet of it. New from any hardware or plumbing supply store that runs about $30. Old PVC drain pipe from a building demolition or salvage center is free in almost every region if you ask. One 90-degree elbow fitting for each end of the pipe. A small roll of fine window screen, the kind sold in rolls at hardware stores for door and window repair. A handful of zip ties or a short length of thin wire. That is genuinely it. No specialty parts, no permit to own any of it, nothing that requires a licensed professional to touch. Here's the one thing most people get wrong. They bury the pipe shallow, a foot down, maybe 2. They follow the instinct that digging is the hardest part of the project and stopping early saves work. Norse builders at Hedeby never made that decision. The sunken floor structures documented in Jonkun's excavation records show consistent earth contact at a minimum of 3 feet and more commonly 4 to 5 feet along the earth-facing wall. Structures in the same settlement that used shallower earth contact, identifiable in the comparative site record by the absence of thermal differentiation in the soil layers directly beneath, show none of the temperature buffering that the deeper buildings achieved. Shallow burial gives you outdoor air with a 10-foot detour. It changes nothing. The pipe must run at a consistent depth of 4 feet for the entire length of the run. Not 4 feet at the entry point and 2 feet in the middle. 4 feet for every inch of horizontal distance from start to finish. Even one short rise along the pipe, even 6 inches of upward slope, moves the air out of the stable temperature zone, and the system loses most of its effect before the air reaches the indoor end. Here is what the build looks like from the first step to the last. Measure 15 to 20 feet out from the outside wall of your home on the north or shaded side. Mark a straight line back toward the wall. Dig a trench along that line, 2 feet wide and 4.5 feet deep at the bottom. That extra half foot of depth gives you room to lay the pipe and still have 4 solid feet of soil above the pipe's top surface when you fill the trench back in. Dig slowly at the corners if you hit large roots. The trench does not need to be perfectly straight. It needs to be consistently deep. Lay the pipe in the trench with a very slight tilt toward the outdoor end. About 1 inch of downward slope for every 10 feet of run. You can measure this by holding a long level against the pipe. When one end of the bubble just barely touches the line, the slope is correct. That tilt matters because cool air meeting warm soil produces condensation inside the pipe. Water droplets that form on the pipe walls the same way a cold glass of water sweats on a humid morning. If that condensation has nowhere to go, it pools, and pooled water grows mold and eventually blocks airflow. The slight outdoor tilt lets every drop roll toward the outdoor end and drain clear. The pipe stays dry, the air stays clean. At the outdoor end, fit the elbow pointing downward at roughly a 45-degree angle toward the ground. This keeps rain from flowing straight into the pipe and stops most flying insects from entering. Cut a piece of window screen large enough to wrap around the elbow opening with a half-inch overlap on every edge. Pull it snug against the opening and secure it firmly with zip ties or wrap wire around the perimeter. This screen is your only filter. It stops mice, frogs, large beetles, and leaves from traveling inward. Check it twice a year. Once in spring when insects become active and once in autumn after leaf fall. Replace it when it is clogged or torn. That is the entire maintenance schedule for this system. The next detail is the one most people skip. It explains why Norse earth contact structures in Jenkins' excavation record performed so differently from one building to the next, even at the same settlement, using identical construction methods and identical materials. The outdoor intake must be in permanent shade. If the pipe intake sits in direct afternoon sun, the air entering it is already 10 to 15 degrees hotter than the air 2 feet away in the shade. The earth inside the pipe has to work against that extra heat the entire length of the run. The air arrives at the indoor end warmer than it should. Norse builders at Hedeby consistently oriented their earth contact walls to face north or northeast, according to Jenkon's published site plans showing building orientation across the settlement. Shaded intake, shaded earth approach surface, maximum temperature drop at the indoor outlet. Place your outdoor intake on the north face of the building, under dense vegetation, against a solid fence that blocks afternoon sun, or anywhere that receives no direct sunlight between 10 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon. That single placement decision changes the output temperature by more than 10 degrees on a hot day. It costs nothing to do correctly and cannot be fixed after the trench is filled. At the indoor end, the pipe enters through a low opening in the foundation, or a crawl space wall, and terminates above the floor inside the room. Fit the second elbow here to direct airflow upward into the room rather than blowing along the floor surface. If you want to move air actively, place a small fan at the indoor opening. One that draws as much electricity as a single standard light bulb is more than adequate. The fan pulls, the earth cools. The room receives air arriving at close to ground temperature, which in most of the continental United States sits between 50 and 60 degrees through the peak of summer. That air warms slightly as it enters the room, which is why the indoor temperature settles near 65. Rather than staying at ground temperature. If you use no fan, the system operates passively whenever outdoor air pressure is higher than indoor, which is the normal condition on a hot summer day when doors and windows on the far side of the house are open. Warm air rises and exits through high openings. Cool air from the pipe fills the low space below. No electricity, no moving parts, nowhere. There's a simple test that tells you in under 30 seconds whether the system is working correctly. Hold the inside of your wrist, the soft, thin-skinned side, directly in front of the indoor outlet. Your wrist is significantly more sensitive to air temperature than your palm. If the air feels noticeably cooler than the room air around it, the system is working. If it feels the same as room air, there are exactly 2 possible causes. Either part of the pipe run is shallower than 4 feet, or the outdoor intake is receiving direct sunlight. Check both. Fix whichever one applies. No other condition produces that result. What you just built is the same thermal principle that Norse builders stress-tested across 9 centuries of construction in some of the harshest inhabited climates on Earth. Every technique this channel covers was developed by people who could not afford to be wrong. Subscribe if that matters to you. This is where that knowledge lives. One pipe cools one room. That solves one problem. Now consider what Norse settlements did with the same principle applied across an entire community, and what that means for how you think about the cost of this system entirely. The Norse settlement at Hedeby, at its peak in the 10th century, held a population estimated between 1,000 and 1,500 people, according to Jenkins' 1956 site survey. Every longhouse in that settlement used earth contact as its primary thermal strategy, not because a contractor sold it to them, because the builders who trained under previous builders passed the knowledge forward through every structure on the site, generation after generation, without a single invoice. A community of 1,500 people, no power infrastructure, no billing cycle, staying livable through summer by the same physics you just ran 20 feet of pipe to install. No bills, no infrastructure, no asking anyone's permission. There is one condition where this works less well. Norse builders in certain regions recognized it and documented their solution in the structural choices preserved in the excavation record. The answer is the last thing in the script: high groundwater. If the water table in your area sits within 2 or 3 feet of the surface, common in low coastal areas, river floodplains, and regions with heavy clay soil, The ground at pipe depth does not hold a stable temperature through the summer. It follows the water table instead, which responds to rainfall and season far more quickly than deep, dry soil does. The ground around the pipe stays too wet and too thermally variable to act as a stable, cold reservoir. In those conditions, the earth tube loses most of its cooling potential. Norse builders in low-lying coastal areas, including those at Kaupang in Norway, excavated by Charlotte Blindheim of the University of Oslo Museum of Cultural History with excavation reports published in the Kaupang Funeni series beginning in 1981, consistently placed their earth contact structures upslope, built into hillsides and elevated terrain, rather than on the flat ground near the waterline. The solution was not a different technique, it was better placement of the same technique. If your land sits low and wet, find the highest available point on your property. Even 3 or 4 feet of elevation above a wet and low area can change the effective depth to dry stable soil by enough to make the system work at full capacity. The stone longhouse in Iceland is still accessible today. Preserved under volcanic ash for 9 centuries and excavated beginning in 1939, its sunken floor and thick turf walls still show the exact geometry that placed living space inside the Earth's thermal layer. The ground at that site holds the same stable temperature it held in the year 1000 CE. The air moving past that Earth contact surface still drops in temperature for exactly the same reason it dropped 1,000 years ago. The physics did not change. What you built today works by the same mechanism. It does not need a service contract. It does not need a replacement component shipped to you on a schedule. It does not need a technician with a license standing in your living room. The ground holds the cold. The air carries it inside. That has not changed in 1,000 years. It will not change in the next 1,000. I do not know what brought you here today. It does not matter. It works either way.